Hello students, I am Dr. L.K. Das, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Department of HSS IIT Roorkee. Welcome to another lecture of the NPTEL course Power and Politics in Contemporary India, a Sociological View. In this third week, we are discussing the role of state, what is state and how do we understand state within the framework of political sociology. In the previous class, we had discussed about Louis Althusser and how he used something called structural Marxism as a framework in order to understand state within the framework of the repressive state apparatus and ideological state apparatuses. Now, in today's lecture, we will discuss how two scholars, Nikos Poulantzas and Ralph Miliband, they discussed the role of state and particularly what is a state in a capitalist society, because as a matter of fact both of them happen to live in capitalist societies in Western Europe. So they wanted to see whether a state is capitalist or a state is functioning within a capitalist society. Now these are very different kind of formulations. There are two different kind of formulations and I will come to both of them in a little while, is because when you say a state in a capitalist society, that means if this is the capitalist society CS, this is the state, and the purpose of this state is only and only to serve the interests of the capitalists and how to reproduce it. On the other hand, if you have a state and capitalism is inside of it, that means the state is autonomous to capitalism. Now this is the broad framework at which these scholars dealt with, and this is the broad framework at which most of the scholars in the 1950s, 1960s and 1970s were dealing with. Because with 1945 and between 1945 to 1965, most of the ex-colonized nations or ex-colonized areas had become independent, including India in 1947. Because they had become independent, so they had also got into the track of calling themselves democratic states. This is also the time of Cold War, in which we have two blocks, one block headed by capitalist USA, other part headed by this USSR. The third part was that the non-aligned movement, which was headed by a multiplicity of nations including India. Although these scholars were not much bothered about what is happening in India, but they were most certainly bothered about what is happening in the West. Why? Because they understood the state from a particular trajectory, from a particular lineage, and this lineage told them that if it is a capitalist state, how it needs to function. If it is a socialist state, how it needs to function. If it is a mixed democratic state, how it needs to function. Now, Ralph Miliband, he was an academician, sociologist in the UK. He wrote a book, State in Capitalist Society. He was referring to this model. And to critique Miliband's work, Poulantzas provided the second structure. Now the difference between both of them was that while Ralph Miliband gave concrete examples of what was happening in the United States, what was happening in UK, Nikos Poulantzas made it a theoretical approach. How can we understand state from a theoretical point of view. In that sense, Miliband was also drawing from traditional Marxist understanding of a state. That state is there to serve the purposes of the ruling class. And very much like that of C. Wright Mills, he also claimed that whether it is United Kingdom or it is the USA, all the elites have similar class background and similar ideological influence. That is the reason why when they are coming and becoming part of a state, they have no other interest than to propagate and reproduce the capitalist society. So, if the state is functioning in any other way, that means it is just working at the surface level. The moment we dig or excavate a little deeper, we understand that it is throughout capitalism. It is serving only the interest of the capitalism and certain elites of particular class background. Poulantzas had a little bit of difference with Miliband, because when Miliband claims that elite recruitment happens through institutional embedding, he is again referring to the elite theory. The elite theory which says that state and its class interests are one and the same. So, all the policies that are created by the state, it's created for a particular class, not for everybody, even if this state is a welfare state. So, welfare state is giving you health care, it is giving you free education, it is giving you the clean water and others. It is doing so primarily to serve the purposes of the capitalist state, because when you have a healthy, educated and well trained population, that means it is going to help capitalists and its enterprises to move ahead with a lot more efficiency than otherwise. So, even if the state and its institutions like the parliament, like the judiciary, like the executive, they functionally work as democratic or formally function as democratic, but their formal function is also to serve the capitalist interests. That is the reason why he claims that although the state appears neutral, but actually upholds class dominance. He is referring to both USA as well as UK, also because in UK, even now, most of the land mass, most of the real estate is owned by the aristocratic families. And the level of inequality in UK might actually put to shame many of the developing countries. At the same time, in the United States, which is supposed to be the polar opposite of UK, which is based on meritocracy, which is based on class interests rather than the status and aristocratic interests, it is the same thing applies. It is very difficult for anybody who is from the working class to move beyond the way it has started its course. So, it is always possible that the institutions in a capitalist society will always reproduce the interests of the dominant class and the dominant groups. So there is no difference between the state and the capitalist society. Pulantas, he had a polemic uh, disengagement or discussion with the Miliband's argument, in which he argues that Miliband has completely misunderstood the role of state itself. Because as we discussed in the previous class about Althusser, who claimed that his ideological state apparatuses were autonomous. Autonomous to the state. Now, ISA also constitutes of market. Now, if it is a capitalist market, that means the state can take its own call whether to completely support this or to partially support it. In a moment I will come why this is very significant. It is significant because as we saw with Miliband, Pulantas is saying that state, even if it resembles or resembles a capitalistic state nature, or it has a capitalistic nature from outward, it is not necessary that it is going to only work for the capitalists. It is also working for the workers. Otherwise, why would you have 8 hours working day? Or why would you have different parameters, different laws and different legislations for the benefit of workers, if it is only working for the capitalists? So, the form of the state is significant because a capitalistic or capitalist type of state is institutionally separated from the economy and civil society. That is another reason why, if there is a break in law and order, several groups from civil society go and oppose, or they can go and speak, petition to the state regarding those propositions. If the state as per Miliband functions only for the capitalist interests, that means there would be no role of the civil society. Rather, the civil society will only be a facsimile, nothing more than that. Although he is not discussing about it, but the other scholars have argued that if not in United States or UK, if you go and check out the socialist states, they also have something called a civil society or ISA in terms of trade unions. The trade unions in Soviet Union were trade unions for namesake, because they were all aligned or part of the political party which was in power. So, in effect, even in a capitalist regime, or in effect even in a socialist regime, you have to be very careful to see whose purposes are getting served and what is the form through which the state society relationship or state civil society relationship or state economy relationship is being played out. So, the rule of law, representative democracy, bureaucracy, they are not necessarily working only for the capitalist interests. The law is autonomous, representative democracy is autonomous, and bureaucracy is autonomous. So, to club together the two separate entities and call it as one, as a capitalist state, is a misnomer. So, what we are doing here is that we are bringing two separate entities and showing them as one, whereas they are not one. So that is the reason why Pulantas says that the state is strategically selective. It favors some class projects over others due to its structure. If you remember the class when we had discussed about primitive accumulation and protected areas, I had shown you the conservationist state dyad, right? You can again go back and watch that video. In that lecture, I had argued that the conservationists are not always in tandem with the state is not always in favor of the conservationists. But because of certain class projects, they come together for the declaration of a protected area. Whereas if it is working for only one group's interest, that means we would have seen we would have seen that there was no requirement for the conservationists. There was no requirement for dialogues or discussions. That way, the structure is very significant in the way we lay it out and see who is working in what way and what class interest each one of them are serving. So that is the reason why we can also make a distinction between formal and functional adequacy between the two. So formal adequacy of Pulantas means what is the state's form in terms of its structure, in terms of its design. So whether it is compatible to the capitalist accumulation or it is not compatible to capitalist accumulation. But at the same time, because it is formal in nature and the form can also hide some other aspects through the work of ideology, liberal democracies can conceal exploitation. Liberal democracies, even in the context of India, for up till the 1990, also had companies, also had factories, also had workers, wherein the workers were facing similar kind of exploitation as the others would have discussed in the other regions, other countries in the global south. But because we are a democracy or we are a liberal democracy, so we say that this work which is being done or this is not exploitation, they are working for the state, for the welfare of the state, or they are working for a better tomorrow. And I have a very interesting example here. Interesting example in the sense of all the time there is this distinction that is made between India and China, that India is a democracy, a functional democracy, whereas China is a dictatorship, one party system. And in that one party system, the workers are highly exploited. Whereas in the context of India, because it is a liberal democracy, so we cannot have that level of exploitation. But if you go and check out the entire informal sector in India, where people work for 10 to 15 hours each and every day, they are as exploited here as they would be exploited even in China. But because we are part of liberal democracy, we are quite able to hide or conceal this form of exploitation, but in the name of democracy. But then because Miliband had another argument, it also served his own purpose. Now there is a third person here. The third person is the argument that is brought by Bob Jessup. Bob Jessup argues that both Pulantas as well as Miliband were arguing on something they did not understand properly. They did not understand properly because they were trying to integrate two different types of states or two different ideas of states. These two different ideas were working on two different planes. In the colloquial terms, they were comparing bananas, or whatever way it can be drawn, and oranges, rather than oranges and oranges. While Miliband was bringing concrete examples of what was happening in UK as well as in the USA, Poulanthas was arguing at a theoretical level without bringing in the context. Now, as we have been speaking over the past several classes, political sociology always looks at contexts and how historically something has evolved or developed. Without looking at the context, any form of debate, any form of dialogue is missing out the elephant in the room. In the next 2-3 classes, we will discuss very specific examples of this. When we discuss Sudipta Kaviraj's idea of passive revolution, when we discuss political and civil society of Partha Chatterjee, and when we discuss the rethinking capitalist development in terms of need economy and greed economy of Kalyan Sanyal. Each one of them looked at the context of India and had a different notion of how to look at whether India is a case of capitalist state or state in capitalist society, or it is a case of state which is also controlling different sets of economies. Is mixed economy in India actually mixed economy, or there is an overwhelming domination of capitalists? And if that is so, what structure has it taken, and what conjectures they have been taken? So, form as well as conjectures, they would become quite interesting there. So, we need to understand, according to Bob Joseph, both capitalist type and real states. When we say capitalist type, that means we can have different types of states, capitalist states. A capitalist state which is dominated by state enterprises. When we talk about capitalist, are we talking about private capitalist, or are we talking about state capitalist? Or, as in the case of India, are we talking about something in between? That is the reason why context is very significant. That is the reason why conjectural analysis is very significant, and that is the reason why looking at real states is very significant. So, that is the reason why Bob Joseph calls it a non-debate and mutual misreading. So, it went on to an extent that their debate became very polemic, and this polemic, as a matter of fact, did not yield any result, and eventually both Poulanthas and Miliband, they understood that there is something lacking in their argument, and they needed to revisit what is the nature of state itself. The old Marxist idea of nature of state only being representative of the capitalist class may not hold much water. And to say that capitalist takeover of the state has not happened, that is also subject to debates. So, when we look at what kind of autonomy are we talking about, then only we will understand neoliberalism, authoritarianism, as well as democratic deficits. Because with neoliberalism, the welfare state has taken several back steps, and with authoritarianism on the rise in different places, different countries, we don't know whether it is the capitalists or it is the state which is in power. To give an example of the China and Russia, now most of the billionaires or biggest kind of entrepreneurs and capitalists in that country are afraid whether their companies are going to survive or the state is going to take it over. In the case of the Russia, if you are quite rich or if you are super rich, there is a possibility that you might be imprisoned. So, whether authoritarianism relies on capitalism or authoritarianism relies on something else is subject to debate. And Poulantzas and Miliband, the way they had debated on the nature of the state, did not provide us with an answer. That is the reason why Bob Joseph claims that we have to look at the contextual understanding of autonomy. We have to look at the real societies, we have to look at real states and what power states have or what power they do not have. Only through that we can understand why there are no revolutions, but there are so many revolts happening. Why is it that capitalism, even though in 2008 or 2018 or even now, there is a lot of crisis, but still it is not going away anywhere. Is it supported by the state through its massive the infusion of funds, or there is something else to it, or is it too big to fail now? So, when you discuss those examples in the subsequent 3 classes, we will get in detail of this the Poulantzas-Miliband debate, and will bring in the other kind of cases to understand specificities of Indian society, Indian state, and how scholars have tried to understand it within the framework of political sociology. So, these are the references that we have, and you can read selected chapters of this book, Karl Marx. It is not, this is a book not just on Karl Marx, but it discusses the different strands of Karl Marx's thought on state, on civil society, on society itself, on capitalism, so on and so forth. And the debate on Poulantzas and Miliband's understanding of state and what is the intervention by Bob Jessop can be understood from here. Thank you very much.